My grandfather worked in a sausage factory in the 1970s. Back then, food wasn't just scarce, it was a battleground. If you've ever complained about long lines at the grocery store, imagine lining up for hours only to find empty shelves. Meat was especially rare. The state controlled everything, from how much meat farmers could sell to how it was processed. But even Dedushka, a loyal factory worker, didn't realize how far they had to stretch the definition of meat until one fateful day. It started like any other day. Dedushka was on the factory floor, where the machines were louder than a subway train at rush hour. The smell of curing sausage hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of oil. He told me that his job was to ensure the machines ran smoothly. If they stopped, the sausage stopped, he'd say. And if the sausage stopped, well, people would riot. The pressure was immense. That morning, something caught his eye. The mixing drum, where the meat was ground, wasn't spinning properly. So, he opened the hatch to inspect it. And that's when he saw it at the stuff that would haunt him forever. It wasn't meat at all, at least, not what you'd call meat. The mixture was 70% breadcrumbs, 20% soy, and if you were lucky, maybe 10% of actual meat. At first, Dedushka thought it was a mistake. Surely, this couldn't be what they were putting in the sausages. But when he reported it to his manager, he got a response that he would never forget. The manager said, "What did you think you were eating all these years? Steak. We're making sausages, not miracles." That was the moment Dedushka realized the meat everyone was eating was little more than a Soviet survival hack of Frankenstein's monster of breadcrumbs, soy, and spices. He said the workers started calling it Breadwurst as a joke. But the name stuck, and soon, even the locals knew about it. In those days, every meal was a challenge. Families would gather in communal kitchens to cook what little they had. Breadwurst became a household staple not because people loved it, but because it was all they could get. My grandfather said kids hated it. "Is this bread or sausage?" they'd ask, poking at it like it might bite back. But for adults, Breadwurst was more than food, it was survival. When I tell my American friends this story, they can't believe it. Growing up, the biggest food crisis we had was whether we could grab Twinkies before they sold out. Meanwhile, in the USSR, people were lining up for hours to buy sausages that weren't even made of meat. My grandfather told this story not to make us pity him, but to teach us resilience. Breadwurst wasn't just a sausage. He'd say it was a lesson. You can't control what life gives you, but you can always make something out of it. And that's what Breadwurst was, a small miracle born of necessity. It didn't taste great, but it filled stomachs. It kept people going when the system didn't. Today, I decided to recreate Breadwurst Dedushka style. I mixed breadcrumbs, soy, and just a little bit of ground beef. The result? Well, let's just say it's not winning any awards. But as I take a bite, I'm reminded of my grandfather's stories. Breadwurst wasn't about taste, it was about survival. And in its own strange way, it's a reminder of how far we've come and how much we take for granted. So, that's the story of Breadwurst, a sausage that's 70% bread, 20% soy, and 100% resilience. Would you have eaten it back then? Or do you have your own stories of survival food? Let me know in the comments. And remember, every meal has a story. Some are just a little breadier than others.